My mother kicked me out to make room for my sister, but I uncovered their plan. You know how people say your life can change in a single moment? For me, that moment came during a simple dinner at home. The house smelled like lasagna, my favorite, but that night, something about my mom's forced smile and the perfectly set dinner table felt off. I am Madison, 32 years old, and for 3 years, I've been living back in my childhood home, taking care of my mother after my dad suddenly passed away. When Dad died, everything fell apart. Mom, Diane, spiraled into depression. She could barely get out of bed, let alone manage the house, bills, or even basic daily life. She was drowning in grief and debt. I was living in a tiny apartment across town, working at East Point Marketing as an admin. Not my dream job, but it paid the bills. When I saw Mom struggling, I did what any daughter would. I packed up my life, gave up my apartment, and moved back into my old bedroom to help her. I thought it would be temporary. 6 months max. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I basically became the co-owner of the house without my name being on any of the papers. I cooked. I cleaned. I handled the repairs Dad used to do. I paid most of the mortgage, the utilities, groceries, and Mom's medical bills not covered by insurance. 70% of everything came from my paycheck. I even picked up side bookkeeping gigs to help cover the gaps. I put my own dreams on pause, thinking it was the right thing to do for family. But that night, as we sat around that dinner table, everything shattered. Mom looked at me after a few minutes of forced small talk. She cleared her throat. Madison, there's something I need to discuss with you, she said. I set down my fork. My stomach turned. Okay, your sister Brooke is going through a difficult time, Mom continued, her voice rehearsed. Her divorce was finalized last month. She's moving back home with Emma and Tyler. Brooke, my younger sister. The golden child. The one who hadn't visited since Dad's funeral. The one who sent generic gift cards at Christmas and never once called to check on Mom after Dad died. I blinked, trying to process. Before we go further, don't forget to like this story, hit subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss what happens next. That's sudden. I guess we'll have to move some things around to make it work, I said cautiously. The guest room should be fine for the kids. Brooke can take the office, Mom cut me off, her tone sharpening. No, Madison. You don't understand. Brooke will need your room. My stomach dropped. My room? Why? They need the space, she said firmly. You'll need to find somewhere else to live. I stared at her like she had slapped me. Wait, you're kicking me out? After everything I've done for you? I've been paying most of the bills, handling everything for 3 years, Mom's eyes hardened. Don't exaggerate. I've contributed too. And now, my daughter needs me. I'm your daughter too, I shot back. You're an adult. Brooke is in crisis. Those children need stability. And Frank has offered to help with the finances. Frank. Of course. Mom's new boyfriend. The man who had slowly inserted himself into every part of her life over the past year, offering unsolicited advice and sly comments about how I was still living at home at my age. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You've been planning this, haven't you? I whispered. The phone calls. The secret conversations. Clearing out the storage room. You've been erasing me from this house for months. Don't be so dramatic, Mom snapped. You have 1 week to make arrangements. Brooke's flight lands next Friday. I stood up from the table, shaking. My dinner sat untouched. I need some air. Be reasonable, Mom called after me. You have until next Friday. Jessica's kids need stability. I walked out of the house that I had held together for 3 years and finally let the tears fall. Not just for the betrayal, but for the years of my life I had wasted, believing I was valued. The night my mother kicked me out was the moment I saw everything for what it really was. Not a misunderstanding. Not a temporary lapse in judgment. A full-blown setup. For the first 2 days after that dinner, I tried to calm down, telling myself maybe Mom would come to her senses. Maybe after she saw how wrong this was, she'd change her mind. But no. Every day, more boxes showed up on the porch. Brooke had already started shipping her stuff over. Frank was walking around the house like he owned it, rearranging furniture, taking down my father's old fishing plaques to make room for the kids' things. By day 4, my name was stripped from every bill. Frank and Brooke were helping Mom get organized. The mortgage? Shifted entirely into a joint account between Mom and Frank. The utilities? Changed. Insurance policies? Updated. Even my parking permit was canceled. They weren't just kicking me out. They were erasing me. That night, I called Emily, my best friend since college, desperate to vent. Madison, this was never about Brooke, Emily said bluntly. This has been in motion for a while. Frank saw an opportunity and took it. He's consolidating control. I swallowed hard. But how? How could my own mother allow this? Because you were convenient until you weren't, Emily said coldly. You paid the bills. You cleaned the house. You kept her afloat after your dad died. But now Frank's offering her comfort, security, and your sister's giving her grandkids under the same roof. You're expendable. As painful as it was, Emily was right. And I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving without a fight. The next morning, I requested copies of the house's legal documents from the county clerk's office. The house had originally belonged to my father. When he passed, everything went to my mother as sole owner. That part wasn't surprising. But what shocked me was what came next. 3 months ago, my mother had signed a transfer on death deed, something I had never even heard of, naming Brooke as the sole beneficiary of the house upon her death. I wasn't mentioned anywhere. That was my breaking point. They didn't just want me out. They wanted to ensure I never came back. I confronted my mother that evening, standing in the living room, our living room, while she sat there calmly watching TV. You rewrote the deed, I said flatly. She didn't even pretend to act surprised. I needed to secure Brooke's future. What about my future? I asked, my voice shaking. You're young, she said dismissively. You'll figure it out. That phrase, so simple, so cruel, lit a fire in me I didn't know I had. I called Sarah Collins that night. Sarah was a family friend who'd gone on to become one of the sharpest attorneys in Charlotte. We hadn't spoken in years, but when she heard what was happening, she didn't hesitate. Come to my office tomorrow, she said. Bring every financial record you have. Emails, texts, everything. The next day, I laid it all out. Bank statements showing I'd paid 70% of the house expenses for 3 years. Receipts for repairs I personally funded. Screenshots of texts from my mom thanking me for covering her medical bills. Emails from Brooke, casually thanking me for keeping mom afloat. Sarah listened quietly, flipping through the stack of documents. Finally, she looked up. They think you're stupid, she said simply. They think because your name isn't on the deed, you have no claim. But they're wrong. Sarah explained something I'd never considered. North Carolina recognizes something called equitable interest, meaning that even if I wasn't legally on the title, my financial contributions could give me legal standing as a co-equitable owner. Especially since my payments weren't just rent. I was paying the mortgage, the taxes, the repairs. In the eyes of the court, that mattered. And if Frank's been shifting assets around under your mother's name while planning to cut you out entirely, Sarah added, we may have a case for fraud and undue influence. It was the first time I felt hope since that dinner table conversation, but the fight was far from over. The real kicker came a few days later when Mrs. Harper, our elderly neighbor who lived across the street for 20 years, knocked on my door with a tight, anxious look on her face. I don't mean to meddle, she said, her voice shaking slightly, but I thought you should know. Know what? I asked. 2 weeks ago, I overheard Frank and your sister talking in the driveway late at night. They were discussing how mom won't last much longer and how everything will be Brooke's when it's done. I felt like the ground dropped out from under me. They weren't just planning to push me out. They were already looking ahead to when my mother was gone, and everything would be theirs. They're circling her like vultures, Emily said when I told her. You have to hit back hard, Madison, before they strip everything. Sarah agreed. This is no longer just a civil dispute, she said. This is full-blown elder financial exploitation, and we were going to prove it. The moment Sarah said the words elder financial exploitation, everything shifted. What started as a family betrayal was now turning into a full-blown legal war. The more we pulled back the curtain, the uglier it got. Sarah filed immediate injunctions to freeze any major financial activity tied to my mother's estate. That meant Frank and Brooke couldn't touch the accounts until the court heard our arguments. But freezing assets was only step one. The real battle was proving how far Frank and Brooke had gone behind the scenes. We subpoenaed financial records from Southern Federal Credit Union, where my mother's accounts had been for years. At first, the documents looked routine: mortgage payments, utilities, grocery expenses. But as we dug into the transaction history, the trail started to reveal itself. 6 months before Brooke's sudden divorce, large sums began moving between my mother's primary account and several joint accounts she shared with Frank. One transfer in particular stood out, a $75,000 withdrawal labeled as home repairs. But there had been no repairs, no new roof, no remodeled kitchen, no major work on the property. Sarah frowned as she flipped through the statements. This looks like staged laundering, she said. They're siphoning money out under false pretenses to slowly drain the estate. Then came Brooke's divorce settlement records, public documents we pulled through the county clerk's office. Brooke had walked away with an unusually favorable financial package, despite the fact that her husband had originally contested almost everything. Let me guess, Sarah muttered. She used money pulled from your mother to fund her private divorce settlement. It was becoming clear, Frank and Brooke weren't just pushing me out. They'd been funneling my mother's money for months, planning this takeover long before Brooke showed up with her bags packed. We also discovered that Frank, despite not being legally married to my mother, had quietly added himself as a co-beneficiary to one of her retirement accounts. All done using power of attorney paperwork signed while my mother was heavily medicated after a recent hospitalization. Sarah shook her head in disgust. "This isn't family dysfunction, Madison," she said coldly. "This is calculated financial abuse." The next break came thanks to Emily, my ride or die from day one. While Sarah handled the legal front, Emily started her own quiet investigation into Frank's background. And what she found blew everything wide open. Frank had a history. 2 prior civil suits, both sealed under non-disclosure agreements, where elderly women accused him of financial manipulation while in romantic relationships. Both cases settled privately. No criminal charges ever filed. He was a predator, a professional. Emily pulled public property records, too. Frank owned nothing. No house, no major assets in his name. Everything ran through joint accounts or shell LLCs tied to the women he latched onto. "This is his pattern," Sarah said. "He moves into vulnerable homes, gains their trust, isolates anyone who might object, and slowly drains the estate before moving on. And now? He had his sights set on my family. But the most devastating piece of evidence came from a phone recording we never expected. Mrs. Harper, our sweet, elderly neighbor who first warned me, had been documenting her observations after seeing how fast Frank was moving in on my mother. One night, she overheard a conversation in the backyard between Frank and Brooke, and she recorded it. We sat in Sarah's office, listening to Mrs. Harper nervously play the file. Frank's voice was clear as day. "You need to stay on, Mom," Frank whispered. "Keep her thinking she's just reorganizing. The new deed's done. The accounts are in place. Once she's gone, everything transfers clean. Madison won't see a dime." Brooke laughed softly. "She'll fight it. She always does." Frank responded coldly. "She can fight all she wants. But once Mom passes, it's over. Let her waste her money. She's already lost." The silence in Sarah's office afterward was suffocating. "This is it," Sarah finally said. "This recording proves intent. It shows premeditation, manipulation, fraud, and most importantly, their plan to completely disinherit you by targeting your mother's declining health." Now, with the recording, financial records, and Frank's civil case history, Sarah filed a formal complaint with North Carolina's Adult Protective Services. And that opened the final door we needed. Within days, a full investigation was launched into Frank's activities. Caseworkers arrived at my mother's house for interviews. Bank accounts were officially frozen. The court assigned a temporary guardian ad litem to oversee my mother's financial decisions until the investigation was complete. Frank tried to block everything, hiring expensive attorneys, sending cease and desist letters, but it was too late. The state was involved now, and people like Frank can only hide so long under real legal scrutiny. But while all this was happening, Brooke made one last desperate move that I never saw coming. She showed up at my work, at East Point Marketing, unannounced, standing in the lobby with tears streaming down her face. "Please, Madison," she whispered. "Let's not destroy the family." For a second, I almost broke. She was my sister after all. But then I remembered her laughing in that backyard recording. The way she sat silently while Mom kicked me out. The way she let Frank dismantle everything. I looked her straight in the eyes. "You destroyed the family, Brooke," I said calmly. "Now you can live with it." I walked away without looking back. By the time Adult Protective Services completed their preliminary investigation, the evidence against Frank and Brooke was overwhelming. They didn't just take my money. They didn't just kick me out. They systematically dismantled my father's legacy and tried to make sure I never saw a dime of it. But now, the state was finally ready to hit back. 2 weeks later, I got the call from Sarah. "It's official," she said. "The district attorney's office filed charges this morning. Frank was facing multiple felonies: financial exploitation of an elder, fraudulent transfer of assets, wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial crimes." Brooke wasn't getting away clean either. While she wasn't the mastermind, she had assisted every step of the way. She was charged with conspiracy, aiding and abetting, and obstruction for lying during the early phases of the investigation. Sarah scheduled an emergency hearing to appoint me as my mother's temporary financial guardian until the criminal case concluded. This time, the courtroom was packed. News had gotten out. The local press ran headlines: "Well-known Charlotte businessman under investigation for financial exploitation scheme." Frank's face was everywhere. Brooke's name wasn't far behind. The same people who had once treated Frank like some polished, charming savior were now scrambling to distance themselves. In court, Frank finally showed his true colors. He sat across from me, completely different from the smooth-talking man who had charmed my mother. His jaw was tight. His eyes burned with pure hatred. For the first time, I saw the predator underneath the nice suits and fake smiles. His lawyer tried everything, claimed my mother was mentally unstable, claimed I was bitter and jealous, claimed Brooke was only trying to protect our family. But Sarah? She dismantled every lie, one by one. She played the recording from Mrs. Harper, presented the financial records, laid out Frank's previous civil cases, introduced sworn statements from Cindy, the family accountant who had quietly assisted Frank in funneling money before finally flipping when subpoenaed. The judge was ruthless. "This is not a family dispute," Judge Holloway said. "This is organized elder exploitation for financial gain. You preyed on a vulnerable woman for your personal enrichment." By the end of that hearing, the court froze every asset Frank had touched: his bank accounts, joint accounts, business holdings, even his vehicles. Brooke? She sobbed throughout most of the hearing. Her once confident posture now collapsed under the weight of everything finally crashing down. But the hardest part wasn't watching Frank or Brooke squirm. It was seeing my mother sitting there, quiet, confused, unaware of just how close she had come to losing everything. The court-appointed guardian ad litem later confirmed what Sarah and I had long feared. My mother's early-stage dementia had been worsening for over a year. Frank and Brooke saw it first, and instead of protecting her, they exploited it. That's why they moved so fast. That's why they pushed to isolate me. They knew time was short before someone else noticed. After the hearing, as we walked out of the courtroom, Sarah pulled me aside. "Now it gets serious," she said. "The DA is going to push for prison time. But Frank's going to fight like hell to cut a deal. Be ready." Sure enough, within days, Frank's lawyers reached out. They offered a plea deal: reduced prison sentence, surrender of all assets, full financial restitution to my mother and me, but only if we dropped civil suits and agreed not to pursue further charges against Brooke. Sarah presented me the offer with a straight face. "It's not a bad deal," she said carefully. "It locks in guaranteed prison time and gets your family's money back." But I couldn't give him that. I sat quietly for a few minutes before answering. "No deal," I said. "He doesn't get to steal years of my life, destroy my family, and walk away on a bargain." Sarah nodded with pride. "Then we take him to trial." Frank's arrogance had finally met someone willing to go the distance. And now, the only thing left was to watch him drown in his own lies when the jury heard everything. But right before the criminal trial started, something happened that nearly derailed everything. A secret that even I didn't see coming. Brooke flipped. When Sarah told me that Brooke flipped, I didn't believe it at first. This was the same sister who sat there while I got thrown out of my own home. The same one who let Frank run the con while she cashed in on every dirty dollar. Now, suddenly, she wanted to talk? We met in Sarah's office the next morning. Brooke looked like a completely different person. No designer clothes, no smug attitude. Just pale, nervous, and on the verge of breaking. Her lawyer sat beside her, speaking for her at first. "Ms. Evans is prepared to fully cooperate with the district attorney's office and provide sworn testimony regarding Mr. Foster's actions in exchange for a reduced sentence." Frank Foster, her precious stepfather, the man she helped rob my mother blind. Sarah looked at me. The choice was mine. I nodded once. Let her speak. Brooke took a shaky breath. "It started small," she whispered. "Frank promised he could help stabilize Mom's finances after Dad died. He said if we didn't move fast, the house would be lost. Lie number one: my income alone had been covering nearly everything since Dad passed. But they used fear to justify stealing. Then it got worse," Brooke continued. "Frank convinced Mom to sign documents she didn't understand. She was already forgetting things, names, dates, where she put her medication. He said we had to simplify things to protect her. That meant putting my name on the house deed, shifting retirement accounts, creating joint accounts." Her voice cracked. I knew it was wrong. I knew Madison should have been involved. But Frank said you'd fight it, that you'd take everything for yourself if you found out. I clenched my jaw. "He manipulated you," I said coldly. "But you still let him do it." Tears streamed down her face. I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything after my divorce. "He promised we'd both be set for life." "I didn't know he planned to push you out completely." I almost laughed at how pathetic it sounded. She didn't know? She sat silently while I got evicted. She watched while my name was erased from the financial records. She signed the forged documents herself. Sarah cut through the noise. "You'll testify under oath?" she asked. Brooke nodded. "I'll testify. I have copies of documents Frank made me sign. Bank transfers he directed. Phone logs. Everything. That was the nail we needed." Sarah immediately contacted the DA, turning Brooke into the state's star witness. Her full confession destroyed any remaining defense Frank's legal team could hide behind. The DA even reopened Frank's sealed civil cases from his previous victims, using Brooke's testimony to expose a full criminal pattern. When the trial started 2 months later, Frank walked into that courtroom already defeated. There was no slick smile this time. No fake confidence. Only a man watching everything he built collapse under the weight of his own greed. Brooke testified for 6 straight hours. Every shady transfer. Every manipulation tactic. Every time Frank instructed her to help pressure Mom into signing documents while drugged or confused. And then came Mrs. Harper's recording, played for the entire courtroom. The jury didn't flinch. Frank barely looked up. Sarah stood for the final argument. Frank Foster didn't make a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a cold, calculated scheme to rob a vulnerable woman of her life's savings, her home, and her legacy, while her daughter, Madison, was the only one who truly cared for her. He preyed on a family during grief, isolating, manipulating, and stealing at every turn. But not anymore. It took the jury less than 4 hours to return guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Frank to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for financial crimes, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Brooke received a reduced sentence, 18 months in state custody and 5 years probation as part of her plea agreement. After the sentencing, I walked out of that courtroom with Sarah and Emily at my side. The weight on my chest finally started to loosen. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could finally breathe. But the story wasn't over yet. Because after the trial, I faced the hardest task of all, trying to rebuild what little family remained. And that would prove to be more complicated than any courtroom battle. The legal battle was over. Frank was behind bars. Brooke was serving her sentence. And for the first time in years, I walked back into that house, my childhood home, not as a guest or an outsider, but as its legal owner and protector. But standing in that front hallway didn't feel victorious. The house was hollow. Not physically, the furniture was still there. The pictures still hung on the walls. My father's favorite fishing hat still hung by the back door. But emotionally, empty. Because what I really lost wasn't just money or property. I lost my family. The family I thought I had. The state-appointed guardian officially handed over full legal guardianship of my mother to me once the court declared her mental incapacity permanent. By then, her dementia had worsened. She barely remembered Frank. She sometimes confused me with Brooke. The disease had stolen the sharp, loving woman who raised me. But I never blamed her for what happened. She had been easy prey, trusting the wrong people at the most vulnerable time. I moved her into a full-time care facility, one of the best in Charlotte. I visited her 3 times a week. Sometimes she recognized me, sometimes not. But I was there. Because after everything, I still believed in showing up for the people you love, even when they can't love you back the same way anymore. As for Brooke, after serving her sentence, she moved out of state once her probation began. We haven't spoken since her release. She tried writing me once. An apology letter. It sat unopened for weeks on my kitchen table. When I finally opened it, it was full of explanations, regrets, excuses, the usual words people use to soothe their own guilt. I didn't respond. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And some wounds take a lifetime to fully close. The house. That took me the longest to confront. I couldn't live there, not after everything. Too many memories. Too much pain layered into every wall. So I made the choice my father would have understood. I sold it. The proceeds went into a new chapter, a place of my own, free of ghosts and betrayals. Sarah, my attorney, became a close friend throughout it all. She was there for me during every brutal moment, every breakdown behind closed doors. At the closing of my new home, she handed me the keys and smiled. "You earned this," she said softly. "You fought for your life, for your future, and you won." Emily, my rock through everything, still comes over every weekend. We sit on my back porch, drink coffee, and talk about normal things again: work, vacations, TV shows, real life. Finally, the settlement money. I invested most of it into a trust for my mother's care. Exactly what Frank tried to steal. The rest, I used to rebuild. Not just my finances, but my peace of mind. Looking back now, after everything, I realized something simple but powerful. It was never about the money. It was about dignity. About refusing to let people steal not just what you own, but who you are. I lost years. I lost family. But I kept my soul. And if there's one thing I've learned after all this, sometimes the people who betray you the worst are the ones who call themselves family. But surviving them, that's the real victory. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it too.